All right, episode 3. Today we're going to talk about electric guitars, mixing electric guitars for worship, for online church. And there is 100 ways to skin this cat. It totally depends on the song. But to me, most of the time for contemporary worship, guitars, electric guitars, especially if it's an electric guitar driven song or if that's a prominent instrument in that song, it is the element of the mix that creates a lot of the width, a lot of the texture. I also use different elements, and maybe we'll get to those today, like pads, keyscapes, and a lot of times piano can bring a lot of width. Anything in that key synth family of instruments can bring a lot of width. I want to keep reminding us of the standard of what we talked about in the first 2 episodes. And one of those things is editing. Editing is key. Editing is the difference between an amateur mix and a professional mix. And so in every instrument, and it is not any different today, it starts with editing, especially with your rhythm guitar. The way that we track this, both guitars were no amps. They were just through a DI that modeled, had amp simulation built into the DI. So not the best scenario in the world, not the most pure case, but that's what we had at the time. And I don't know that I would have changed it in a recording unless we had an environment that we could isolate amps and mic them efficiently. But in this environment, we did not have that choice. And so this was the most isolated, best decision that we could have made. And we worked with what we had. So let me show you the raw track, which is the rhythm guitar. And let me show you what I had to start with. So as you can see, there's sections. It's sectioned off here, and that's because I edited. It is so repetitive that I edited 2 different sections. And you can see in the waveforms here that one of them has a little peak right here, and on the next loop, it does not have the peak right there. And so you can see there's 2 different loops. I'll loop whenever is necessary, and whenever you can't tell that it's a loop. Whenever it's kind of a prominent instrument, I hate to do just a 2-bar loop and then just leave it. It becomes more noticeable that it's repeated if you do that. In this case, I think I only did 2 bars at a time. Yeah, you can see this and this are the same loop, and this are the same loop. So they rotate back and forth. Let me show you as far as editing. I pretty much took every single hit, every stroke, every pick of the guitar, and it is quantized to the beat. This is where this event starts. This is where that measure starts. So that one I didn't do right there. I held that one off. That one I held off. If I wanted to edit it, I just bring it in like that. That's how I go through that track and get it to where if it's such a prominent instrument like that, it's really holding down the main kind of riff of that song, especially in the intro. It needs to be edited. And I'll tell you an even more important reason why it should be as close to perfectly in time as we can make it. Let me play this through and show you how close it is. This one's a little bit off. I can drag that back. But you can see I tried to get it as close as I could to the grid, taking every single one of those initial picks and the transient and dragging it to the grid. And this is just audio warp. It's actually stretching the audio. But since it's either off like this or off like this, the stretches are very, very minimal. And it is already an overdriven kind of distorted instrument. And so you don't hear those stretches. And something very intricate, I don't know that I would use warping to do that, but it's going to be manipulated a little bit anyway. And so the warping, you can't really hear it, and it's a great way to quickly edit an instrument without having crossfades that sound natural or that you're trying to make sound natural all over the track. And so that's how I started. I started initially by just taking what I had, deciding what place it had in the track, and what the editing process would look like. And in this case, I chose to loop it, at least for this verse section. And you can hear when it gets into the chorus, it obviously changes and I can't use the loop. So. But I still went and edited that as well. But I'm not editing that down to the 8th note or 16th note or 8th note, whatever he's playing right there. I'm just taking the obvious intros of that arpeggio that he's doing and making sure those are landing where they need to land. The more something holds the track and the more prominent it is, the more time and care that you have to take with that. I think that's an obvious statement. But so let's figure out how to take this from a single mono track to giving it some more width and having it hold a little bit more weight in the overall mix. I'll show you what this sounds like in context to the song. I'll show you the chorus. I'll show you the next chorus. With drums in it. Okay, so let's solo out this guitar again. The first thing that I did to this guitar, and the first thing that I do to many, many instruments in the mix, is filter. And you'll hear this probably over and over again when you're talking about mixing, not just for worship, but in general. Filter out the things that you don't need. In this case, in a lot of cases, it's your low end. You got to keep your low end as isolated as you can possibly get it. If the things that need to occupy those low end frequencies, like kick drum, bass drum, maybe some synths in some occasions, percussions, things like that, let those occupy those space. And everything else that just is not the prominent EQ kind of range for that instrument, which we're talking about electric guitar, I don't need anything below 100. And I'll play this and I'll show you where it's kind of peaking and wanting to be. So if I take off this low cut, most of the meat of the instrument is right in here. In fact, I don't even have a high cut on it, and you can see above like 6K, 7K, there's not any information anyway. For an electric guitar, it's going to take up a lot of mid-range. It does not need to occupy sub-low frequencies, and it does not need to occupy, above 7, 8, 9K. Otherwise, it just starts sounding icy, like a death metal guitar or something like that, which we're not mixing death metal. I put a low cut on it, and that just takes away. The low cut starts right around 100, and it's a pretty steep slope. So it's going to cut off everything down there that I just don't need anyway. I'll show you with it on and with it off. So it's not damaging the sound at all. It's just cutting out things that we don't really need to occupy that space. The next thing I did is I compressed it. I'll open up this compressor, and I'll show you how hard it's compressing it. Not hard. Basically, it's just tightening up this instrument. It's a rhythm instrument, and so it's just tightening it up. Not in terms of timing, it's just tightening up the attack and the release. And so I'll show you it without the compressor and with it. This is without. And this is with it in. So you can see it's not doing much. Again, let's stay with that principle that we talked about in the first two episodes. I think mainly in the first one. The source is the key. If the source isn't good, don't hit record. Or knowing that either you're going to replace it or reamp it later, the source has to be good in order to catapult the rest of your mix. If you're spending so much time releasing so much energy and putting so much effort into just fixing something that wasn't good in the first place, you're not going to have a creative mix. You're not going to have a dynamic creative mix. You're just going to have a bunch of stuff that you've tried to manipulate and fix and tried to get it to sound halfway decent. That's not what we're going for here. We're going for a dynamic mix that sounds great, wide, deep, has feel and fascination to it. And so I don't need to do much to this to manipulate it. The only thing I'm going to do is try to give it some width. But as far as EQ and really trying to change the tone of the guitar, I'm not trying to do that. I felt like it was already pretty decent and sat where it needed to sit already in the first place. So that's why this compressor is not really doing much. It's tightening it up. I can hear it. That's why it's on the track. So what I did in order to make something mono that doesn't have very much width at all, there's a couple ways you can do it. The first way is you can take this mono track and you can send it to a stereo track. And so I created a send or a bus or an aux, whatever your DAW calls it, in a stereo format, and I sent this guitar is going straight to, I can send it all the way to Electric Guitar 1, which is what I named that stereo bus. And you could see the ST afterwards. It tells me that it's in stereo mode. It's not going anywhere else. It's not going there and the stereo. It's going straight to this stereo bus for processing. And then that stereo bus, if I pull up that is going to the stereo out. That is going to my 2-bus out. I put a little bit more EQ on this one, I guess, in the final mix, which, by the way, when we get to the final episode of this series, I'm going to walk through the entire mix and every instrument and how it sits in the mix and where my levels are and how I processing on my 2-bus and panning and all of those decisions that get made in right before final mix. I'll go through that. And maybe this is a decision that I made a little bit later on before I actually made the decision in the mono track. And so you can see that's without it on. So it's not doing much. Maybe in a different part of the track, it was kind of peaking in that area, and I just dipped it out a little bit just to tame it a little bit. So the main thing that is going to give this guitar width and help it take up more space is sending it to a stereo track and then stereo processing on that track. In this case, it's a rhythm guitar. It's doing a kind of a staccato riff that holds down the verses and the intro to this song. And so I didn't want to put a ton of reverb on it to give it width because it just wasn't appropriate for this sound. But since it is staccato, since it's rhythm, a delay would give it width and would stay appropriate. So here's without the delay. And here's with the delay. This is a ping pong delay, and I have a lot of space on there. It's a dotted eighth. It's only at 16% feedback, and it's only at 5% in the mix. I'm not trying to get this track to have a delay effect on it. I just want to widen it. And putting a delay, a big stereo delay, or a big reverb on it, but turning the mix way down is a great way to widen a mono track without putting a ton of junk on it that is inappropriate or doesn't match what we're going for in the mix. So that's everything that I did to this guitar. I sent it to a stereo bus. I put a low cut on it, a very light compressor on it. Once I hit the stereo bus, what's also too important is you'll notice this before it hits this bus, this is at full volume. This is at 0 dB. This is at unity volume when it gets sent to here. If it is at a lower volume, that lower volume is getting sent to your stereo track. So don't mix. Once it gets sent to that stereo track, this is the track that you're mixing, not this anymore. This is your source. So that needs to remain at 0. You can do panning information and things like that, or I can do panning information in the stereo track. Panning doesn't affect the gain that's going to the effects in this track, not too much. And so it does on the right channel if I pan it left, but I'm not super worried about that. The width is coming from the delay. Here is this track with all the processing that I have on it in the context of the mix. So you can kind of hear what it's doing. Now I'm going to get to that other guitar, which is I processed that width in a different way. And here's how we do that. Here's the kind of the texture guitar. I don't know if I would call it a lead, but it's taking more of a texture melodic role in this mix. And I chop this up. The original just had a lot of kind of empty space in here that he... I took those out and I chopped it up into his lines that were more melodic and appropriate. So this is what I chopped this first section to. And in the context of the song with that other rhythm guitar track, I felt like we didn't need the in-between space because he's just doing eighth notes with delay on it. And there's a lot of staccato eighth notes up in this other rhythm guitar track. So here's both of them together. And I felt like it covered enough space and kept it interesting enough. So what I did with this track is you can tell there's a lot of delay on it, and I had to put a little bit more delay on it for a couple different reasons. One, we're talking about stereo width. That adds a ton of stereo width. Two, this guitar player already had a delayed patch on, but if I'm chopping it up like this and it's tracked with delay, I'm cutting off his delay. So I had to replace that with my delay, which I would have rather done anyway because mine is a stereo delay and his was just tracked through a mono amp simulated DI with overdrive on it. And so let me show you how I processed this track. You'll notice that I'm not sending this track to another bus, but what I did is I had the original track tracked as a mono on its own track. And so if I take these, unprocessed the way they are, put them on a mono track, and this is how I received them in the first place. So you can tell it just like abruptly kind of fades out if I'm chopping it like that. Now that I put it on the stereo track, we can tell how wide it is and how much effect I put on it to help it keep its character. Natural fade out on the delay. So what I did is I took this mono track that I had originally had, that I originally captured it in mono, and I just created a stereo track. That's all. I just created another track. In Cubase, you add track, audio, and it asks you what you want the configuration to be, stereo or mono. I just hit stereo. It doesn't matter what my audio inputs are because I've already have that information that I'm going to add to this track. I'm not actually recording it right now. And then I choose where I want that track to go. In this case, I just want it to go stereo out to my main 2 bus, and then I name it whatever I want. So that's how I would start. I would make that track, and then I would add this mono information to that track. Just drag it down to that track and make sure it's in the same place and time. For me, that's holding command and dragging it so it doesn't lose its spot. But that's what I did. Dragged it to that track, and now it is ready for stereo processing. That's what this track is. I'm going to go ahead and erase what I just did. So if I open this track up, I did the same exact thing. I put even more of a low cut on here. all the way up to 175. And we can see if I take the EQ off and I take off the low cut, can't see the RTA then. So you can see all the way down here, we're not getting any high-end information. So that's why I boosted it a little bit on the high end, just to give it a little sparkle. I don't want a ton, but I did want more than what was there. The low cut, let's see what it's doing. So I can see the prominent area of interest and where the meat of that guitar and the fundamentals of its tone are all coming from in here. I didn't really need anything below that. And since it's not holding down a huge part in that track, I really just wanted what sounds good off of that guitar, and I can eliminate the rest knowing that it's just going to cause mud and confusion down in that low end. So those are the first things I did. I didn't even compress this. I felt like it didn't need it. It's not a very consistent track. It adds a lot of dynamics already to itself within the context of the mix. And so the first thing that I did is I added delay. That one I bumped up to all the way 100% width. That is bumped up to 35% as opposed to 16 from the other track because delay is a big part of this sound in this guitar. And that mix is at 22.5%. It's also at a dotted eighth delay. I do some filtering through here. Usually that's more with vocals. As far as the high filter and the low filter of just the delay, I usually mess with that more on a vocal track than I would on a guitar because I want the full delay of the guitar. I don't want the delay messed with really that much in the guitar. And then I put some reverb on it, and that's only at 10%, but it is a big, big room and a big space. That's bumped up to 84% on the kind of bigness of the delay, or I'm sorry, the reverb, and you can hear what these two effects are doing. Here's the track without delay or reverb. And here's the track with delay. You can already hear a ton of width in that. And I'm really keeping with the same character of what he originally played in the first place. Now here's with delay and reverb. You can already hear a ton of width, a ton of stereo width that this is adding to that track with, in my opinion, not really taking away from the character of what that guitar player was going for in the first place. So again, let's hear this in context of the song. Let me play a little bit more dynamic sections for you. I'll play a chorus for you. I will play both of those guitars without any effects on them, and you can hear how much width and how much character this is adding just by that reverb and delay that gives it the stereo width. Here's that same section without any delay or reverb. You can hear I'm not really messing with the character of the guitar. I'm just widening it. And I'll put those effects back on. I'll play it one more time for you. So another little trick, if you watched episode 1, you know that sometimes in order to add width and depth to maybe a snare drum, you put a sample on it and then you process that sample more than you would the actual kit. So your effects and your sparkle, whatever you want to put on, is just landing on that snare drum and not on the entire kit, because there's a lot of bleed in the kit and sometimes that gets messy really, really quick. So same concept, but with electric guitar. If I know that there's a rhythm section like it is right now, very staccato, very rhythmic, very repetitive, then in order to help that out and give it a little bit more width, a little bit more sparkle, I tracked just a pick guitar, a muted picking guitar twice so I can get stereo width, and I processed that stereo and you can hear what that's doing. And that took me not a lot of time at all because I'm just doing the same note. The whole point of this is just to enhance what's already there. It's not to add another fake guitar that nobody's going to see in the video. I don't know if you even noticed it was there without looking at my track count right now, if you would have even been able to tell that there's another guitar in there. I'm really not trying to cover up or add anything. I'm trying to enhance what's already there. And so that's what this line sounds like. And you could tell I just looped it over and over and over again. It's just one note, and all it does is enhance this other guitar. Here's with them both together. In fact, I'll play the measure before because you can hear it without it, and then when the muted picking comes in. Here comes the muted picking. So all I did with the muted picking was track guitar twice, 2 separate performances, and that's how you get kind of the width going on. This was panned all the way left. This is panned all the way right. 0 processing, both at unity, getting sent to a stereo bus. In that stereo bus, I cut out a bunch of the highs. I don't want it to interfere with the rhythm guitar that's already there. I don't want it to take over the sparkle or the tone of that. I just want it to add width. Of course, I put a low cut on it. I emphasized some of the mids. That was kind of poking out too much, so you can obviously see I saw that and I dipped it a little bit to try to cut that out a little bit. And then where I wanted the tone to shine through a little bit more, I just bumped up. And I cut out a lot of the highs. That's without the EQ on it. So you can see it was a little bit too icy. Put the EQ on it. I'm compressing it. I'm compressing this track a lot because dynamically I do not want it to poke through. Again, the principle is not to interfere with what's already there. So I'm trying to subdue it a lot and just keep it very, very consistent. So that's my compressor on it. I tried a couple more effects and I ended up muting those. I didn't like them. But here's my delay. Delay is spatially spread out to 90%. It's at 25% feedback. On the mix, it's at 31%, which is pretty significant. And I did not mess with the low or high filter on the delay itself. Here's what it's like with and without the delay on it. This is with the delay. And this is without it. So you can hear I'm just adding width to it. I will play all 3 of those electric guitar tracks together. There's nothing else electric guitar-wise in this song besides what I've gone over already. So here's all 3 of the electric guitars that are in this song. Here's another section of the song. So I hope that helps you guys out. That's going to be it for this episode. Let me know if you guys have questions on electric guitars. If I missed anything that you wanted me to go over, don't hesitate to just keep on tuning in. Subscribe if you like what's coming out. Next episode, we'll have keys, pad, we'll have texture, and kind of a lot of the elements of the mix that kind of glue it together and help it sound a little bit more radio and a little bit more professional and polished. So tune in for next time. See you guys.